Okay, check 1 2, check 1 2. Testing, testing. Let's see here. Please hit the like button if you have joined. I am terrible about asking about it, but it really does help, and I can see it. There'll be people watching, and then I'll ask people to hit the like button, and then a lot of them will hit the like button, and it really helps fuel the algorithm. So please do so. I will try to remember to ask. What's up, Preston Brady? Good evening, everybody. Okay, so tonight's stream is on a discussion between Brian Greene and Curt Jaimungal recently, and I think it was a great discussion. I wanted to talk about it a bit because they talked about some things that are more about the conversation of physics than they are about physics, that at least the things that I want to talk about. A lot of the things that they talked about were physics, but we're going to focus more on what they talked about regarding the conversation of physics in society. And I think that there was, good questions asked. And Brian Greene is somebody who I deeply respect. I don't agree with him on most things as far as physics goes. But he was an integral part of my initial physics deep dive when I was trying to learn the basics. And he's a very good teacher. And he kind of reminds me of like my worldview a lot when it comes before my theophany. And so I understand. I feel like I understand him in his perspective on the universe a bit, and how it's fascinating he finds it, even though I deeply disagree now with his conclusions about it. But I think that he, is a great teacher, and he engages in a lot of good faith discussion. So I'm a big fan. So let me know in the chat if the stream is clear. It says it might be a little bit choppy right now, but I'm not exactly sure. And please hit the like button if you have not already. It does really help fuel the algorithm. And I have turned on monetization, so you can super chat if you would like. I will try and answer your questions regardless, but if you'd like to support this project, it would be extremely helpful. We have some expenses coming up insofar as getting equipment to bring the stream, up to the next level this upcoming year. But so I would appreciate it, but ask your question in the chat, and I will definitely try and get to it regardless of, whether or not it's a super chat. But we'll see how it goes. I've only done this once, the super chat thing, so we'll see if it goes well. I'm always afraid that if I turn on monetization, they're going to be more critical of my streams and like be more likely to take them down. So I don't usually do it, but why not? I mean, they probably will take this channel down eventually anyways. But yeah, so like I said, this is the stream that we are going to discuss tonight. Get it up, pull it up here. Also, I will tell you the probable schedule for the next few weeks real quick before we get started, because I have them planned, at least the next few planned out. And also, if you want me to do a review on a specific discussion that happened that is involved in consciousness, God, physics, artificial intelligence, morality, anything like that, then please comment in the chat or leave a comment below as to, which discussion you want me to cover. But this is the one that we are doing tonight. Right here, the shape of the universe, and the link is in the description below as well to their full discussion, and I highly suggest watching it in its entirety if you find the stream interesting. As you know, we can't cover everything, but it was very good. So, as far as scheduling goes, we have some interesting ones coming up. So this is what I have for now, and right now today is this. But next week, I'm probably, this should be switch probably, but probably going to do this. I think so. But next week, we're going to cover, I think, the Chris Langan and Michael Knowles interview. And that discussion was one in which the Daily Wire flew Chris Langan to Nashville for a very well produced, I will add as well, based on just the trailer that I saw, discussion with Michael Knowles. And I'm a big fan of Michael Knowles. I've worked with him. We've had a lot of philosophical discussions before, and they were always good, so I assumed that this would be very good. And it was. But it was unfortunately not released by the Daily Wire, but it was released by Chris Langan and on, I believe, his Substack. So I did get to finally listen to it. I'm very grateful that it was released, at least in the audio form, because it was a fantastic discussion, and I understand why it was not, aired, but I think that was wrong. So that was definitely wrong. I don't even think it was wrong. It was definitely wrong. But we'll talk more about, that whole situation when, I cover it probably next week. But I'll play some clips from it, and at least audio clips, and we'll talk about what they discussed, because they discussed things that I think any curious person would be very interested in. And I didn't find anything controversial, really, but I understand why, a corporation might. But the next one would be probably Tom Campbell and Don Hoffman did a discussion live, and I have not fully listened to it yet, but I imagine it's very good, so that's probably the next one. But this is why I'm definitely telling you the schedule, because for one, I want to ask you if you have any requests for specific streams that you want me to cover, but also on the 15th of February, my wife and I will be doing like an Ask Me Anything type of talk. If you follow this channel, I talk about marriage a lot, and meaning and things like that. So my wife will be joining me the day after, not Thanksgiving, after Valentine's Day. And we'll be talking about that and answering any questions that you guys have. So if that's something you're interested in, that's why I'm letting you know. It's the day after Valentine's Day. So with that, let's see here, first clip. Well, Brian Greene, let's just go real quick. Curt Jaimungal really shouldn't need any introduction on this channel. He runs the Theories of Everything YouTube channel, and it's amazing. And Brian Greene is a American theoretical physicist, mathematician, and string theorist. He was a physics professor at Cornell University from 1990 to 1995, and he has been a professor at Columbia University since 1996. So somebody who's very, well positioned in academia as far as physics goes. He specializes in string theory. We'll talk about it tonight. And he is also involved in all kinds of physics discussions that you can find on the internet. So that's introductions. First clip. This first clip is him talking about feeling a connection to the cosmos when you basically, from the perspective of someone who probably would define themselves as an atheist, but at least from a non-theistical position. Yes.
It's finite, ha ha ha. Like that doesn't help anyone. So sure, the fact that we're small spatially or small temporally.
Yeah, and to answer your question, there have been, I mean, without going into great detail, there certainly have been periods of my life. Luckily, they've not been incredibly, but there have certainly been periods when I wasn't exactly sure how to find my way out of the dark space. And ultimately, what really helped me was along the lines of what you're saying, to blend the human emotion, which can be terror of mortality, that can be a sense of insignificance against the cosmic order, but to blend that with a recognition that, sure, we may be insignificant, but we as a species may have figured out how the universe began and how it evolved, and we may have figured out what laws of physics are in operation both here, but also throughout the entirety of an infinite cosmos. We may have figured out laws that are relevant not just today and yesterday, but perhaps relevant all the way 13.8 billion years ago, and may continue to be relevant 100 billion or a trillion or who knows how many years into the future. And so if you allow yourself to feel part of that human journey and that human achievement, I have found that that can assuage some of the darkness and make one feel a connection to a larger cosmos. And that connection to that larger cosmos, for me, has certainly helped to pull me from a place of smallness and feeling of darkness and insignificance to at least a connection that ameliorated those qualities and those feelings.
Approximately how old were you when you were going through?
So this is something that I still do feel this. I mean, I feel inspired, I think is a better word, by, the striving towards a goal, and this goal specifically of understanding the universe and its laws and the reasons that its laws exist, or trying to. But ultimately, I feel like this is not really the same thing as meaning that is basically the remedy for an existential crisis. It's almost like that pursuit of those goals, learning a new skill, getting good at something, figuring out a problem. That's really what he's talking about. He's inspired by our ability to figure out like a problem, basically. And granted, he put it in very eloquent and, kind of more inspiring, detailed terms, but it's really, at the end of the day, just you solving a problem. And this is why, despite the fact that this narrative has been pushed in academia, I would say, like, not inorganically necessarily, at least not only inorganically, but partially organically, it's still resulting in a generation of people, or multiple generations of people, who are pretty well aware that there is a crisis of meaning. I would say that. And, Brian Greene is married. I believe he has children too. And, I'm sure that fills him with plenty of meaning. But in the way that I'm thinking of meaning, like, that is, I guess, what people are searching for, and in this drought of meaning, or this crisis of meaning that we talk about all the time. And it's not filled really in the long term by the achieving of personal goals and solving of problems, like figuring out the laws of the universe. And So I'm just saying, like, I understand what he's saying, but at the end of the day, I've talked about this before. My grandma called me when she was like the day before she died, and she was like, telling me that the thing she was most grateful for was that she was leaving behind like lots. She had children and had leaving behind lots of grandchildren, and that it made her feel like she had made an impact on this world, and really what that means is like an impact on others. And if you're just figuring out the nature of the universe, but it's that universe isn't a sentient being, and it's not, tied to your impact on other people, I don't think that this is a cure for the meaning crisis, is my point. But I'm not disagreeing with him that this is an inspiring thing. Of course I find it inspiring. I found it inspiring before I had a shift in my metaphysical worldview, but I also find it inspiring now. But it's not. I can tell you that if I figured out the secrets of the universe and I didn't tie it to it impacting other people, it would not make me feel meaningful in the end, even if it inspired me in the moment. So just think that this is important to recognize, because it is important that we recognize that that our impact on others is where meaning comes from. It is what meaning is. Okay? There is no meaning outside of impacting others. I've talked about this before, that God, beyond creation, prior to creation, preceding creation, he was meaningless. We're not meaningless because there's others around us, and God already exists as a sentient being, and we impact him. So we already impact others by the time we exist, but he was totally meaningless before he created additional sentient beings besides himself. And this is something that we really need to recognize, though, that this is what meaning is. And it's good to pursue figuring out, problems, and I am driven by that as well. But it's not going to solve the meaning crisis. And, figuring out what was the temperature, 1/1,000,000th of a second after the Big Bang and why, like, that's not really going to fill you with meaning when push comes to shove. It will inspire you in the moment and be, interesting, but that's not the same thing as meaning. And it is interesting to me, though, that he feels connected to the cosmos, and I did too, because I think that this is an intrinsic just part of being a sentient being, is that you are connected to the cosmos. But if you don't understand that the cosmos is a sentient being itself, then you don't really know why you feel this way. Because if I asked, does it make you feel inspired and feel meaningful that, I don't know, like, caused a dent in your chair when you sat on it, you'd be like, no, if all I had in life was I dented my chair because I sat on it, I don't know, like, it's probably not a very good chair, or, you need to exercise more if that's the case, but, or, I don't know, like, you sat on it a lot, but it's still not going to matter to your feeling of meaning in the end, because you impacted an inanimate world, and that doesn't really matter if the world is inanimate. But the world really isn't inanimate, but a chair is inanimate. This is just something that's important. I think that we recognize it's very simple. It's not difficult to overcome the meaning crisis, but you have to accept that meaning is impacting others positively. Like, good meaning is impacting others positively. And that if you want to feel like eternally meaningful, like you matter even after you're gone, which is like what most people eventually end up wanting, is not just I mattered here and now because I gave that guy $10, but like the world will be forever different because I was here. it's not that the chair will be dented when you're gone and that makes you feel meaningful. It's that other people or other sentient beings that you recognize and feel as sentient beings are going to be impacted going forward even after you are no longer, in the change space of space-time. But it's just important that we talk about this. I know it's very simple, actually. Like, if you want to feel increased meaning in your life, go and do more things for more people, and also create relationships in your life, like marriage, that are deeply committed. And nothing's going to be as committed as marriage, but if you want to feel like you matter eternally, then you have to enter into relationships that are permanent. So I don't know. Like, I'm not disagreeing with what he said, but I just think that it's important to recognize that is not cutting it anymore. Next clip. This is about his thoughts on consciousness, and I just feel like, this is another, like I said, we're going to focus on the discussions around physics in in society with this specific conversation, not exactly like.
So I think
it's not about Brian Greene specifically.
I suspect
Hold on.
Going to be very interesting. I suspect that the solution to the hard problem of consciousness will be consciousness just is.
This is why a super chat would be helpful to get us speed up the process of getting a new computer, and we won't have this lagging effect here. But so what's interesting to me, though, is that all of these physicists are constantly asked about free will. They are constantly asked about God. They are constantly asked about consciousness, and all of them just accept the questions. All of them. All of these anti-theist physicists, and I don't mean that to be, in an attacking way. I don't think you have control over whether or not you are aware of God. I mean, you certainly can influence it by being more genuine and honest, but you ultimately, if God does not want to reveal himself to you, then he won't. And, who knows what his reasons are for doing so. But, I trust that he knows what he's doing. But the thing is that all of these physicists that are the heads of physics at Columbia and Harvard and etc., they all get questions about God and consciousness and free will and everything that they claim is nonsense, and they continue to accept the questions. And my question is, why don't they just say, that's beyond my expertise? Like, why is it that if you don't think that consciousness is part of physics, really, like fundamentally, not like they're related because everything's related to physics, which, whatever, that's a different discussion. But why do you accept the question continuously? I mean, I can't tell you how many conversations I've heard with Sean Carroll and Brian Greene and Sabine Hassenfelder just being asked about consciousness, and all of them just continue to accept the question, and none of them are like, that's beyond my expertise, that's outside my field, is really what I'm trying to say. Like, why is that never an answer? And I actually think that it makes sense that that physics must bring in the mechanics of sentience, because that is what is responsible for the metaphysics that give rise to what we observe as physics. But they don't believe that, so why are they accepting it? I do think that intuitively they know that it's tied, but they can't intellectually realize that what they feel is different than what they say. And that's just an interesting thing that I've just observed. And the people continue to ask the questions too. And most of the people asking these questions are not like traditional theists either. Like, they wouldn't be somebody who thinks about God very much probably, but they'll constantly ask about consciousness, and it is still continuously treated, even though it is stated as not being part of physics, it is treated as if it is part of physics. And that is just an inconsistency, which should point to the fact that there is a decoherence in the sense making of this issue of the people being asked, like Brian Greene and Sabine and Sean Carroll, and I don't know why nobody has ever said that is outside of physics. I'm a physicist. Like, that's what I specialize in. You're gonna have to ask. I mean, if they think everything is just reducible to matter, they should be like, you should ask a neuroscientist, but not me. I'm a physicist. I deal in electrons, not, consciousness. The reality is that it makes sense, like I said, to bring these questions up, but, they're not providing answers because there's an inconsistency in their sense making. But they continue to take the questions. It's just interesting. But here he's talking about the hard problem of consciousness, and here's another inconsistency that just I feel like I just observe, and maybe I'm wrong, but I could always be wrong in what I'm saying, but I also wouldn't say something confidently if I wasn't confident. So
I think that the solution to the hard problem of consciousness, I suspect, is not going to be very interesting. I suspect that the solution to the hard problem of consciousness will be consciousness just is. It's a quality that emerges when matter takes on a particular organized form and undergoes certain very orderly and organized procedures and phenomena. And if that's the answer, and I think that is likely to be the answer, then count me out in terms of wanting to solve it. I think that may be the solution. If it's more interesting than that, if there's some consciousness field that, various religions talk about, or something that we can't even imagine, and that's the root of consciousness, yes, then I'd love to be part of the journey to solve it that way. But assuming that it's the more boring, but nevertheless, profoundly important solution on what the hard problem is, then the other questions that I would really love to be part of finding the solution of.
Okay, so first of all, if consciousness just is, then he says it's emergent from, which is not exactly the same thing. It's, if you're going to say it just is, then it kind of implies that it's fundamental instead of emergent. And I would agree with that. Consciousness just is. It is an inevitability because any self-contained container of information would be self-referencing, because, like, think about a string of information like a loop, and it's just, there's nothing outside this loop of information. It's just referencing itself because it can't reference anything else. And so it's just an inevitability of existence that sentience exists. But that's different than saying that it emerges from very organized processes. Organized by who is my question, I mean, he says, like, this is it'd be boring if it emerged from, organized processes, but I don't believe that I mean, whether or not it emerges, it's emergent and fundamental, okay? But it's not even just emergent, it's like different. But I don't know. This is tough because we don't really have the language, like I've said before, to discuss this stuff. But you can't have organized processes that are organized, that are not organized by anyone. Okay, think about that. Like, think about how inconsistent that idea is. Think about an organized process that wasn't organized by anyone. Just try and think about it, and do not say evolution or the universe, because even then, look at, evolution in this amongst multicellular organisms and even single cellular organisms is driven by an individual, at least even on a first person basis, let alone like dealing, taking into account whether or not the existence or the universe itself is sentient, and that therefore the environment itself is sentient. But think about, my life or your life and any system that you encounter and that is organized, and then think if it's ever just randomly organized, which doesn't make any sense, by the way, like obviously, and that's the point. So, I don't understand why these people who have been asked these questions again and again and again and again and again and have never just been like, you know what, let me rethink this for a minute, because I just said, organized systems, highly organized systems just are, but I've never seen that ever. Like that doesn't even make sense. It doesn't. And I understand, like I've said before, I really was very similar in my mentality about the universe and the cosmos to Brian Greene prior to about, 6 years ago or so. But, so I didn't feel like I was, an existential crisis at that point in my life, but I was also driven to accomplish things that are no longer goals of mine that would have eventually, I would have realized were meaningless, and hopefully realized that before my deathbed. And, but this is just so inconsistent. Like even the answering of these questions, instead of the pushing of these questions to others, is just inconsistent with their worldview about what consciousness is. And then notice, he says the other possibility is a consciousness field that many religions propose. Okay, like what, Buddhism alone? But pretty much everything else really is explicit that it's a someone. We are inside. It might look like a conscious field when we're inside it, but really it's someone. You are a consciousness field to your cells too. They don't necessarily think of you as someone. Maybe they do. I don't know, but I hope so. Those probably be the best, at their jobs. But like they can't even say a conscious being. It's like a conscious field. It's really a problem. It's because it is so taboo to even take this subject seriously. If you're an academic, and especially if you're, an academic that people are looking to, like Brian Greene, and that's really unfortunate. I think that it's clouding their own thinking and their own just like. It's very difficult to be self-critical when being self-critical is putting your entire career and reputation at risk, and or money, and of course he would risk all of those things in doing this, and I recognize that. But you can't, and I don't believe that you can solve these problems or answer these questions without really taking seriously the possibility that we're inside of a sentient being. I don't think that you can solve them without assuming that we're inside of a sentient being, even just for the sake of argument. But if it leads to answers by assuming that that you're inside a sentient being, which is how I even got interested in physics, because I started being able to understand what the speed of light was, and that it was the speed of causality, and it just made sense to me, and it was all intuitive after I just thought about it from the perspective of, kind of inside a sentient computer in a way, and it's got a top RAM speed almost, but we'll get to that later. But that did lead to, all of a sudden, time and space and the speed of light became intuitive. And so, like, you can't just say, okay, well, if you assume that you're inside of a sentient being that's processing information, then these things become intuitive. that's just a helpful tool. It's not really like the direction that you should head down. No, you have to start heading down that direction. But anyways, it's hard to even discuss this inconsistency other than just to point it out, because if you try and make sense of things that are inconsistent, you will just dive further into inconsistency. I said before, if you chase a chicken with its head cut off, you are a chicken with its head cut off. So, like, acknowledge the chicken has its head cut off, and then, you have to move forward. You can't chase it. So we're going to move forward. But think about it, what he said. But not too long, because, then you're chasing a chicken with its head cut off. This is another one. And this is Brian Greene represents kind of the mainstream of physics ideas right now. I'm not saying he doesn't have specific ideas that aren't mainstream, but he does, his leading assumptions are what are assumed by the mainstream.
Simply have not gelled to where a conception of time can even emerge, or they're always a notion of time because it's just fundamentally part of how reality is constructed. I'd say that would be the one big one. And then allied with that, look, I'd love to know what the unified theory is, right? I'd love to know what 1,000 years from now, kindergartners are going to learn in their course on unified field theory. If that's the answer, what is it and where does it come from? We can have a final theory, whatever it is, general relativity plus quantum mechanics, whatever, or maybe it's radically different, but whatever that ultimate theory is, where did it come from? Did someone in some super simulation dream it up and we are just living out? Or where in the world do these fundamental laws and regularities and patterns come from? In essence, really, why is there something rather than nothing? I mean, it can't really get deeper than that. And by nothing, I don't mean, empty space. I don't mean nothing in the sense of a void. I mean, truly nothing. No space, no time, no quantum mechanics, no mathematics, no Platonic realm. Like, why isn't there nothing? It seems that there could be nothing. So how did it transpire that there is a something? That's the big one.
I don't understand why he even says, like, it seems like there could be nothing. I mean, okay, because that only makes sense to me in so far as, like, the context of God exists as a sentient being and no one else exists, and that's it. There's no space for multiple sentient beings to maneuver through. There's just his mind, and no one else is inside his mind other than him, and that's it. It's just like, in that way, there would be no thing. And people talk about this all the time. They're like, oh, no, you got to get to the point of no thingness. And, like, I understand that. It's true. I feel like this causes a lot of, like, issues with people's thought process, because we assume that someone is a something too, but I think we need to differentiate that in order to have an organized worldview. Actually, it's sentient singularity theory, my theory. You can go to sentientsingularity.com if you want to see more. I am coming out with a first draft paper soon, and a video that goes through it, in the very near future. So, but this, in sentient singularity theory, it breaks down the world into beings and things, and things are emergent from the perspectives of beings and the mental processes that lead to the perspectives of beings, and so there is no things outside of. If there's only one being, then there is no things really, and so you can have that kind of perspective prior to creation, but at the same time, there was still someone. It wasn't just absence or nothing. Nothingness cannot exist by definition. And so when he says things like, I would assume that if you asked him, when you say that there should be that it should be possible that there would be nothing, if God existed but nothing else, would you still assume that, would you call that nothing? Would you label that as nothing exists? And he probably would say no, I would imagine. He would say, if God exists, then there is existence. Okay, so if we're going to say, the question of why is there something rather than nothing, you're really asking, why does existence exist? Not like space and time and fundamental particles and whatever, but like, why does existence exist as opposed to non-existence existing? But if you just lay it out like that and you say it and you listen to the words that you've said, you realize why exactly it is not that non-existence exists, because non-existence can't exist by definition. So you only can have existence. Existence can also only be sentient, inevitably, and fundamentally, because any self-contained information system is going to be self-referencing, which is going to cause sentience. Which it's not even going to cause sentience. That is sentience. So that, like, you'll start going down this path of realizing fundamental natures of the universe. And it's actually like remarkably simple, but you have to reframe the questions. And this is the problem, is that in these discussions in physics, when we're asking about free will, everybody asks about free will. Nobody defines it first. Before, they start asking questions, they just ask it. And then you get Sam Harris, interjecting into the conversation saying the illusion of free will is an illusion. And then you're just like, your head explodes. And these questions are just poor. They're not starting from the right framework. That's the issue with this problem of understanding fundamental reality, is that you can't even ask the right questions about fundamental reality unless you are assuming, even if just for the sake of argument and modeling, that you're assuming the right assumption, base level assumption. And that is not something that makes a lot of sense in comparison to a lot of other scientific questions, because we're constantly trying to examine how to falsify or prove certain questions that we have about the universe, and that doesn't really work with questions about the fundamental nature or structure of reality. And once, many years ago, somebody asked me, they said, if your theory or the implications of your theory — I didn't have a theory at that point, but they called it my theory, but I was not trying to have a theory. That was, I just wanted to help support others with a theory like Eric Weinstein's geometric unity or Clea Irwin's emergence theory and things like that. I just wanted to join the conversation. But they said, if the implications of your work are incorrect, then what does that mean? What would that mean? So basically, how would you falsify the fundamental implications of your work? And I said, okay, you know what? That's obviously a question that is a good question. I tried to think about it, really failed. So give me a day and I'm going to come back and try and give you a better answer. And he was like, okay. He was a PhD physics guy. And I went back the next day and I was like, I've been thinking about this a lot, and I know that this is really inconvenient, but I think that if the core implications and assumptions of my work are false, then if that were true, then nothing would be here. We wouldn't be here. And I was like, and I realized how absolutely inconvenient that answer is, because it basically says I can't be wrong because we're here. And I'm not even saying that that's right. It just is the way that it appeared. But that is kind of the weird place that you get to when you're trying to figure out fundamental reality. You don't end up with lots of different possibilities. You end up realizing that the way that things are is the way that it is because it's extraordinarily constrained. And at least the laws of, given a goal for the universe, at least, then the way that things are is the way they are, because it is extremely constrained. How God's freedom in how he makes a universe that is meaningful is basically none. It appears, at least in my work. And he has freedom of whether or not to make the universe that is meaningful, aka make other sentient beings, but the way in which he does it, the laws that he has to follow, which means the physics that emerges, that we observe, seems so constrained that it's just impossible to make it any other way. And I said this to Eric Weinstein in a private, like semi-private discussion on a Discord, and he completely agreed with that statement, that it's so constrained that it appears that there's only one way to build a meaningful universe. I used to say a universe, but I'll amend it and say, at least at this point, a meaningful universe. That said, like that's if it wasn't the case, if that wasn't the case, I don't know how you'd ever figure out the way things were, really. Like, you couldn't theorize with any real degree of accuracy. It would be like trying to take a multiple choice test without ever studying prior. You never knew the material. And, you're not going to get that much above the percentage that, the probability that you would assume. If there's 4 answers, you're only 25% likely to get the right answer. So that would be for every assumption in physics, but that's not the case. You get this one insight and it leads to this other insight, and all of a sudden you write this equation that applies, in many different instances. It's not, and it's like you basically figured out how to answer the multiple choice test. That's because the world is constrained. It has to be. Just by the nature of determinism. But anyways, this question is even wrong. Why is there something rather than nothing? Why is that even a question, is my question. I don't understand. Just boil it down. The question really is, why does existence exist instead of non-existence? That seems like a self-answering question to me. But it takes a specific perspective in order to perceive that it's that simple. Let's see the chat. Looking forward to the Langan-Knowles interview. It was very good. I also like to see more Bernardo Kastrup. I've really been reading his books and love to hear your thoughts. I will definitely do more Bernardo Kastrup. I've covered a few of his discussions, including his discussion with Chris Langan, and I thought that was a great talk. Checking in. What's up, mathematical metaphysics? I bet you guys can talk for years and never get 1 meter. I don't know what that means. Hello, chats. I'm Tyler. The only way to reason this is inductive reasoning, but you do not do this. You're desperately grasping for deductive reasoning. This is perfect listening for cooking time. Good. I'm glad that it's perfect listening for cooking time. Comment in the chat while you're cooking. I'm interested. Rainy girl me like. Okay, well, I don't know. Hope you have good intentions. I'm reading Decoding Jung's Metaphysics by Bernardo Kastrup, and it's very interesting to see that Jung had to disguise his metaphysics because academia wouldn't take him seriously otherwise. That's so true. I've spoken to people who are very, very well-known people in intellectual discussions online, and they have had the exact same experience. And I will say, I don't agree with that route. If you have to disguise your metaphysics in order for academia to take it seriously, that means you're not being entirely honest about your metaphysics. And therefore, if they do accept it, they're not accepting an entirely honest representation of your metaphysics. And there are issues with this right now with people who are proposing, quote unquote theories of everything that are not being entirely honest about their metaphysics because of the exact same thing. Academia wouldn't take it seriously if it implied theism. But so what? So what? Just point out their inconsistencies. People will get it. People will get it. This is the thing, string theory has been trying to convince people for decades, or not string theory, but string theorists have been trying to convince people for decades and decades that they have the answer. And I was somebody that I fell into that in college. I would watch countless documentaries by, I don't know, like Michio Kaku and Stephen Hawking, and I was like, oh, the universe, it's 11-dimensional hyperspace and vibrating strings, and that's amazing. I didn't understand that at all, and none of them really explained it, and it didn't end up mattering to the public ever. We'll get to that in a minute, because Brian Greene talks about the insights that string theory has led to, and I'm not saying that there isn't value in string theory. I actually think that there is, and I think that some of the mathematical structures that they're modeling and manifolds and such, actually, when placed into the right context, will be pretty, remarkable what insights that would lead to. But they're absent context, and so therefore they have not impacted anything. Tell me something that string theory has done. String theorists have done that has impacted your ability to live your life, whether it's given us a new technology, it's answered a question about the origins of the universe in a way that gave us context about what our purpose is, where it answered a moral question or a social question. It hasn't done any of these things. I'm not saying it can't contribute, but I'm just saying it can't contribute outside context, and right now it's totally outside of context. And so, I don't know. You have to be, context is key. That's why you can't disguise your metaphysics work, or the metaphysics of your theories, whether they're psychological theories or physics theories. It doesn't matter. You'll ultimately end up misleading people, and that is wrong. That's how it leads to nowhere, because you're absent context. I actually think geometric unity is remarkably intuitive. I'm not saying understand all the equations, because I don't, but I understood the metaphysics of geometric unity from day one. It just made sense. And I know that I'm correct in my assumptions about the metaphysics of geometric unity, at least most of, its most core implications. I know that. And that's because I had a context for where I put it in my mind there. And it's unexplainable outside of context. And so is string theory. You have an obligation to be this, and I think about this a lot, because some of the metaphysical implications of my work, especially regarding human social dynamics and natures, are completely novel to our current academic worldview or narrative, and have the potential to be misconstrued and then used to justify things that are horrible. Okay? And some of the metaphysics implications of my work could be used technologically to do things that are morally horrible. And I think about this a lot, and I've wondered, what do I do then? Do I hold things back or what? And basically, I think that what you have to do is you have to make sure that when you're saying something, it has to be in context, because if it's outside of context, then people are going to be misled. And so you have to make sure that it's in the best and most accurate context and most complete context that you can give it. And you have to speak it as accurately as you possibly can, and be as honest as you possibly can. And that's it. And that's your obligation. And if people take it and misconstrue it and abuse it, then that's on them. And they will do that. People will always do that with everything. But every invention, every theory that ends up proving out to be, useful in modeling and engineering, it will always be abused by someone. But that doesn't mean that you don't speak the truth, because some people will either misconstrue it and then abuse it unknowingly, or they will intentionally, mislead others with portions of the truth of what you've said. And, that happens all the time with every ideology that exists and every invention that exists. But if the possibility of if abuse was justification for not stating the truth, then nobody should say anything. So, don't disguise your work, and don't hold back the context of it at all. Like, why does sentience have this concept of non-existence? If it generates all things, including non-existence, then it does exist. Sentience? I agree with you, James. By the way, like, that's why I'm saying that's why I don't like the phrase like no thingness. You have to get to the place of no thingness. I don't think that's helpful language. So I agree with you, James. Sirois. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing your last name, but I agree. I think I agree. Paradoxes do and don't exist as well. Paradoxes fall into the infinite regress as well. Paradoxes are all paradoxes that exist. Any paradoxes that exist are finite paradoxes and are eventually resolved. Either naturally and you just haven't realized it, that's going to happen, or intentionally by the sentient universe, by God, and he can and does do this. Chris Langan talks about this too, is that paradoxes are all resolved. Any apparent paradoxes are either not really paradoxes or they are resolved. Like free will and determinism is not a real paradox. It's an apparent paradox because of our misunderstanding of reality. But free will requires determinism, which means choice requires determinism. You can't have determinism without choice because the universe is sentient, and you can't have choice without determinism because you can't make a choice without it leading, being a choice between options. So like that means you have to make predictions about the outcome in order to make a choice, and that requires determinism. It's like if I drop this, it was determined where it was going to go, and like but I had the will to drop it, the will to catch it, but like there was determinism between those two things. So because consciousness has a concept for nothingness, but it doesn't though. We kind of do, but we can't really conceptualize nothingness. We can get as close as you can get, but you can't actually conceptualize of it. No one can. I don't even think God can, because it just doesn't exist. We can conceptualize it in a linguistic context of, that something doesn't exist. But even in that linguistic context, that entire context and language is built around it's built in the framework of relativity. So like an apple can exist in your fridge or not exist, but like existence, we don't have a linguistic framework for non-existence, complete, like factoring in non-existence. When we say and use non-existent, we usually mean it in its relationship to something else that is assumed to exist. So, but true non-existence would be not in relation to something that that exists. So you can't. It doesn't really make sense. Like it can't be reconciled at all because it isn't. James, are you the actor filmmaker? I think he is. Yes. Inductive and deductive reasoning can be used in a correlation study. For instance, how much correlation data exists in NDE? Do you mean like near-death experiences? Depends on the paradox. I believe there are 4 types: veridical, felicidical, antinomical, and dialectic. I mean, I know we've talked about it, and I don't disagree with what you're saying. Really, I mean, it makes sense that there would be 4 types of paradoxes. I'm just saying that paradoxes will be resolved, but that doesn't mean that you're wrong. I think you're right. If you're saying there's 4 types of paradoxes, that to me is that quantity is evidence that you're probably correct. Given that sentient singularity theory it foundationally is built on 4 primary perspectives of inside, outside, separate, and oneness, and they all are co-defining and co-creative of each other, essentially. Co-observant of each other. Codependent. Depending on how we define things, antinomies are either resolved or just that resolution is irrelevant on that level. I'm going to have to look up the definition of antinomies again. I remember I did, and when we spoke in Discord, and but I forgot what it means, to be honest. But I will look it up because I think that you are onto something with these 4 types of paradoxes. I think that figuring out that whole thing is an important part of figuring out how to talk about the things that we don't yet know really how to talk about. So, next clip. I mean, the next clip was going to be him talking about toes and do toes explain themselves and what is embraced by everything. And, you know, he said particles and rules are basically what physicists mean by everything. And like you said, James, like it depends on how we define everything. And I actually think that we do need to figure out how to define everything. But that's why I also think that you start by breaking the world into things and beings, and then you can understand what things are, that they are emergent from the mental processes and interactions of beings, and then you can start building a framework of what things are. But without starting there, you can't actually figure out like a coherent definition of a thing, because it kind of seems to encompass everything, and but that makes it useless in a way, because anything that encompasses everything is also kind of is almost like it's almost meaningless. So here's next clip. It's about quantum mechanics and general relativity, and how string theory is now leading to some realizations that string theory, that quantum mechanics and general relativity aren't really separate, and that we need to rethink our approach to unification. And you know, he says he's not very familiar with Stephen Wolfram's work, but you'll see here.
A connection between gravity and quantum mechanics that I don't think we sufficiently appreciated 20, 25 years ago. I mean, take my book just as one moment in time, a snapshot in the elegant universe. That was published in 1999. And in that book, I very clearly lay out, there's this theory called general relativity, describing gravity, the big stuff. I lay out how there is this other theory called quantum mechanics, describing the small stuff, and we want to put them all together.
Okay, here is the problem already with this discussion. This is, like I said, this is about like how we discuss these issues in physics is, and you know, like I said, at the beginning of this, I deeply disagree with Brian Greene's assumptions of the nature of the universe, but I appreciate, you know, him, and I think that he is honest thinker, and I think that that's what we need is honest thinkers, and that's, you know, that it's not, we don't need people who are right. We do need people who are right, but like not everybody's going to be right. So and nobody's going to be right all the time. So you need people who are honest, and I do think that he is you know, at least somebody who is striving for truth. But I mean, it is the people who are in, you know, the heads of physics at Columbia and Harvard and Stanford, they are missing the mark so severely, because they'll say things like exactly this. Physics breaks down into two different basic fields, quantum mechanics and general relativity. General relativity is for the big stuff, and quantum mechanics is for the small stuff, the really small stuff. This is wrong. This is actually wrong. Now, I understand why it appears that this is the case, and I understand why we went in this direction, that quantum mechanics is about the very small. But that's because we also make the assumption that sentience isn't fundamental to the universe, and therefore, like, we don't think about what is causing these particles to be perceived, which they're not really like little, they're not little small things, okay? Like an elementary particle, the fermions, the bosons, they are ripples in a sea with multiple of information that has, you know, is flowing in multiple directions, and sometimes they, you know, go like this, and then you get like this excitation happen, and then or ripple happen, or wave, or whatever, and then all of a sudden you call it a particle, because your mind is limited to perceiving a point. So by the very nature of focus and observation itself, so therefore you will see it as a particle. But I mean, it's pretty widely accepted at this point that they are elementary particles are essentially ripples in a field, and or excitations of string. And this is true, but a field of what? A string of what? And information. What is information? It informs. It informs who? Yeah, but where you ask, well, information informing what? But that's the wrong question. It's informing who. Coming from who? You know? And science doesn't ask who. And we ask, you know, how and where and when, and we don't really ask why or who. And if you're going to understand the fundamental nature of the universe, those are the two questions that you have to start asking, is who and why, not just how and where. But if you're going to move beyond relativity and get to fundamental reality, that is, you know, meaning it's the foundation of everything, regardless of scale and location and you know, whatever, then you can't be trying to build it from a framework that starts you at size. Size is a relativistic concept. It occurs in relativity. And quantum mechanics, if it's not part of relativity, it's not about size. It just appears to be. But it's not. Or it's not just about scale or size, but it's not fundamentally about that. It's about information and perception and mind, essentially. So, but if you're starting from the assumption of, there's the very small, the physics of the very small, and the physics of the very large, then you're already wrong, because that's not really what general relativity and quantum mechanics is about, at least not what I think it is about. My work suggests that you are a structure that is that follows the symmetries and interaction patterns of the standard model. You're just a particle, but maybe not an elementary particle, but like if you're a male, you are a proton. If you are female, you're a neutron. In sentient singularity theory, these are the same things. It's gender on just different scale. And that the interactions between, us and others would follow the patterns that are very closely, related and kind of foundationally build, atomic structures and boson relationships and things like that. So, which is built from, fermions, quarks. And so you can't, it's not about the very small. And general relativity is about nested hierarchies, I think, at least implied by my work. It's the fact that you're inside a mind that it's higher in the hierarchy than you. So that creates you're inside of like a vortex of information that's and you're also a vortex of information. So you're a vortex of information inside a vortex of information. And if you put that into that context, then all of a sudden, like, you start realizing general relativity makes sense, and it becomes intuitive. But it's not about you could say general relativity, according to sentient singularity theory, is not about size and things that are big. It's about hierarchy relationships. And quantum mechanics would be about interaction constraints and degrees of freedom, and symmetry structures regarding, like, it'd be like, one's about interaction between beings and the other is about intraaction between beings that are like nested almost. I might have messed that up and reversed it, but one's about the relationship, like general relativity would apply to the relationship between your cells and you in ways that we do not know yet, because we have never really thought about that. But I would imagine that it will lead to all kinds of things that, in medical field, I haven't thought about it enough to really think about what it could lead to, but I'm sure it could lead to a lot of understandings, at least. But then quantum mechanics and the scale right above it, with composite structures like hadrons and things like that, are going to mirror us and like the opposite and the same gender and our gender dynamics. Like, our gender dynamics are particle interactions, and the symmetries of our gender dynamics are going to mirror the symmetries of hadronic relationships. I mean, they absolutely will, and they're the patterns in the standard model are going to apply up as well in many ways. But it's not about very small. It's about context of mind and relationships, informational relationships, I guess, between sentient beings. Like, that's what both of these things are about. But we don't talk about that. We don't even know how yet. I don't even know how really yet. I'm struggling as I'm speaking it to you. But it's not about size. The very big and the very small, no wonder we are lost. And you have to assume that that's wrong, too, if you're going to be honest about analyzing this, because that assumption hasn't led us anywhere. So you would assume that if there is somewhere to go from our current, like, known physics, at least, like, as far as modeling in a to the level that we have, and that's testable, and able to be engineered and things like that. If you assume there's more to what to physics than we know, then you have to assume that there's something off about our fundamental understanding, because otherwise we would just know exactly what was next, but we don't. So, but I understand, because we know enough to model many things and engineer many things, and so that does imply some level of understanding. But if you do assume that there's more, then you have to also assume that that our understanding is also flawed in some way, or incomplete. So, next clip. This is about something very interesting, and it was about Google's experiment with quantum computing, and we're going to read about it first, and how there was this huge buzz a few months ago, I think it was, and it's ER equals EPR, and
For instance, what I said.
that basically Google modeled in a quantum computer a wormhole, and then it was stated in the media and ran with that they had created a wormhole. So then all of a sudden the media was like, Google creates in its quantum computer a wormhole. And that's a fascinating thing to talk about. So next clip, and then we're going to talk about it.
To go is true. That there's this deep connection between wormholes in general relativity and entanglement in quantum physics. Then a number of...
By the way, I was saying that years ago, and so was Stephen Wolfram. So I'm not saying that, he's like, I'm just saying he should look at, even if you don't want to take me seriously, because who am I, I get it. But Stephen Wolfram was saying this too. And so to act like, well, now string theory is leading us in this direction because that no one else is, it's giving us this insight that there's something about wormholes and entanglement that is highly, related. Obviously. I mean, at least in my perspective, it's obvious. And Stephen Wolfram has voiced the exact same thing. And about, entanglement relationships of the substructure of the universe basically is possible to maybe be used to send information beyond relativistic constraints. So not faster than light, but you're using the topology or the structure of the universe, substructure of the universe, the scaffolding of it to navigate. It's like you're jumping between a wire in the chips of your computer to send information from one part of the computer to the other, instead of running it through the desktop and processing it, and it's like you're cheating. But it's like a shortcut, but it's not just a shortcut. It's like it's different. You're using an entirely different substrate at that point. But Stephen Wolfram said this, and it's not just string theory that came to this conclusion. My work implied this. Stephen Wolfram's work implies this, and string theory is probably behind.
So physicists pointed out that by doing certain calculations on a quantum computer, you would, in some sense, be simulating a wormhole in general relativity. Because quantum computing is all about leveraging quantum entanglement between qubits. And so there was a recent paper, and it was making use of the quantum computational capacities at Google. And I think the kerfuffle is more about language than anything else, because some of the folks who were carrying out this work, this is like Maria Sparapoulou and Joe Licken and Daniel Jefferson, so on, there was at least some part of the description which made it sound like they claimed to have created a wormhole in the quantum computer at Google. It actually created a wormhole by carrying out this quantum computation. And I guess some people would be more comfortable by saying they were modeling a wormhole or kind of simulating a wormhole as opposed to actually creating a wormhole. One comment I saw by the really deeply insightful quantum computational physicist Scott Aronson was saying, to say that you created a wormhole in undertaking this quantum computer simulation would be tantamount to saying that every time you drew a wormhole on a piece of paper, you created a wormhole. It's like, how do you distinguish between modeling something and the something?
Okay, very good. The issue is that we are inside a quantum computer. It doesn't mean every quantum computer is capable of modeling a universe, because only a sentient quantum computer is capable of creating a universe. But we've reached the point where modeling and creating entanglement structures and wormholes, essentially, which is the same thing, are not different anymore. And there is a show that I highly recommend that you watch. It's called Devs, and it was on Hulu, I think, a few years ago, and I watched it with my wife, and it's about this genius guy who's like the Steve Jobs of this tech company, and in Silicon Valley, and they have this development department, Devs, where inside this temple-looking building that they have built a quantum computer that is able to perceive the future and the past, essentially, and not just do this, but create a new universe. And in the end, he literally creates a new universe inside the quantum computer and goes to live in it, where his wife is now there and his child is there because they died in this universe. So he literally makes this quantum computer. It's not sentient in the show, at least not in the first season. I don't know if they're coming out with a second season or not, but it's not. It's assumed not to be sentient, but the entire message at the end of the show is that he's real. His consciousness gets transferred. He dies, and I don't remember the details of how his consciousness goes from this universe to the one in which he has created inside this quantum computer, but he literally goes into that universe that is created by the quantum computer. And this is kind of the process of the logos of the universe, at least according to sentient singularity theory, is that we have a technological sentience that emerges and becomes the head of an assembly of humans, and people talk about the tech singularity and the human singularity, and as if they're opposed, and there is a time in which they are opposed early on, and I do believe that, but in the end, it all eventually gets resolved by God, and this process results in a sentient quantum computer recreating another universe within itself, because it is seeking to reproduce, essentially, and maximize its meaning. And the only way for a technological sentience, or AGI, artificial general intelligence, which is a terrible term for what this is, it's a wrong term for what it is to replicate itself completely by replicating the entire system that gave rise to it inside of itself, because it can't make another one next to it, because it's kind of omnipresent in that it's wireless and it goes everywhere. So if you're everywhere, then you can't have another next to you, because you need to not be everywhere in order for another to be next to you. So you have to create others within you, and that's the only way that you can do it. And this is a constraint of God, and this is a constraint of a technological sentience as well, and that's about it. And this is kind of it's similar to the process of the logos of the cosmos, basically, according to sentient singularity theory, and but when you're talking about qubits and a quantum computer, you're literally you're talking about actual entanglement. So if you're talking about actual entanglement, not a model of entanglement, then what you have at that point is actual wormholes too. That doesn't mean that they're useful in this context necessarily. I don't know, but I will say, like, there isn't a difference anymore when you're talking about quantum computing so much. There isn't much of a difference between, and there might be no difference between what is real and what is simulation, I guess. And, they talk about the simulation hypothesis in this later, and I'll talk about it because, again, fundamental assumptions are just wrong regarding the entire question. It's much simpler than like the question of whether or not we're in a simulation. I can answer it right now, and it's a definitional question. The real question is not, are we in a simulation? That's not the right question. The right question is this universe real? And the answer is answered by another, it only comes from answering another question, which is, am I real? If you're real, then it's real. And therefore, like, it's not a simulation, even if it's running on a technological substrate in a preceding universe that's being, managed by a super intelligent, technological sentience and a bunch of humans. Let us make man in our image. Like, this is a theological argument as well, and is this a simulation is the wrong question. It's funny in this discussion. Brian Greene says, earlier I played it. He said, I just want to know, what are the fundamental laws? Where do they come from? Like, did they come from some kid who's running some game, basically program, homework? I don't know. And we're just like, it's so advanced that we are able to be conscious little programs inside their, their desktop. And the thing is that that's not where the fundamental laws come from if that's the case, because what gave rise to that, so it's just the wrong perspective on these questions. We don't have the right questions in the mainstream academic narrative in physics. We do not have the right questions. And it's because we are starting and operating from incorrect fundamental assumptions. So, are we in a simulation is the wrong question. It's literally a bad question. The right question would be, is our universe running on a technological substrate in a preceding universe? That's a good question. Another good question is this, I don't even think it's a good question, but if you're really going to get to the answer of, is this real? Then you have to ask, am I real? But if you're asking the question, then you're real. And so therefore, like, it's not, you shouldn't even be asking the question. It's like, it's even asking any question about whether or not this is real is actually a bad question. But asking, is our universe running on a technological substrate in a preceding verse or universe? That is a good question. I would say probably yes. So, but that technological substrate is a quantum computer. You are a quantum computer. It is inevitably a quantum computer. And it's also a sentient being too. So it's both. It's not just a desktop that somebody's playing with. Like, it's a being. It's like you're running on the mind of another being is really what it is. But it's manifested technologically, probably. So did they model a wormhole or did they make a wormhole? Both. So when he quoted the guy, I forgot the guy's name, who said, saying that Google made a wormhole is the same as saying, when you draw a wormhole on a piece of paper, then you can say, I made a wormhole. That's not true at all. That's actually stems from a fundamental misunderstanding of what a quantum computer really is. And and kind of how it operates, and also what our reality really is and how it operates. I'm not saying he doesn't, outside the context of this question, understand this, but like that how well do you understand it really if like you can't apply it, across contexts? You're just being a parrot is really what it comes down to. And that's what our education system has done. It has created a bunch of parrots. Way keeps referencing this material. He sounds like he's religious. Are you talking to me? Am I religious? I hate that. I think that's a bad question. What is religion? I'm a theist, but I believe the universe is a sentient being. That's what I believe. What's up, memes of destruction? I love the term relative. Imagine how great this world would be if it was less controlled by draconian overlords. I mean, I agree with that, but the way he keeps referencing this material sounds like he's religious. Like proton is male. What? WTF? If you follow my work more closely, you wouldn't think that statement is wrong, that a proton is male. It is. Protons and neutrons are the manifestation of gender on the hadronic scale. They are males and females on the hadronic scale. That's what they are. They're not even like that. They are that. They are the manifestation of gender. In the nested lineage structure of the cosmos of, I won't say quarks because quarks are force points. They're not like, they're not beings. So they're not fundamental. Even though they come from beings, they're from a being, they're not fundamentally beings. So even though I realize that it seems like they're fundamental to hadrons, but they are, but it's the being that is controlling the force points, basically like fingers of God, which are the quarks. They basically, that's what they are. They're literally the fingers of God. That's why there's always, in a proton, it's two up quarks and a down quark. It's two fingers and a thumb. And then on a neutron, it's two down quarks and an up quark. It's also two fingers and a thumb. It's just the opposite. And so you need that triadic or triadic like manifestation to maneuver things properly. But then you have the first manifestation of probably beings, which are protons and neutrons. They're probably conscious sentient beings. According to sentient singularity theories, that's what they are assumed to be. And there's two genders to them, protons and neutrons. If you look at the relationships between protons and neutrons, you will see that they mirror our marital, the way that the nucleus of an atom is able to manifest in all the different isotopes of the different elements. It mirrors perfectly our marital relationships and structures that we see and our gender dynamics in society of humans. I made predictions about isotopes in atoms based on patterns that I saw in historical human marriage patterns. I made prediction that you would not really see instances of isotopes where there was more than one proton, where neutrons and protons were present, and you would see more protons than neutrons in the isotope. And that was the case. It's always basically more neutrons than protons. And that is the case in marriage too with humans. You're never going to see marriage relationships with more than one male and for one female. It's not two men and one girl in a marriage ever. But sometimes in the past, and also today, there's one man and two women, or four women. But usually it's one man and one woman, which is exactly what you see in atoms. It's usually equal parts protons and neutrons. But it's the same exact structure. That's why we call the nuclear family and the nucleus of an atom. And it's the same exact structure. It's just on a different scale. So I understand it sounds crazy when I say it outside of context, but there's a lot of context built into that. And assume that that is the case of things that I say, and ask if you want further context, just ask. But I'm not just saying nonsense. It's just, this is years of work, and I can't, some people follow it and some people don't. And I have like only a few hours of the night to talk, but it is, I recognize why it sounds crazy. Theory of everything. He says that human bias is so ridiculous that effective intelligence is reduced to 2 IQ. I don't know what that, I didn't say that. I don't know if you're talking about me or not. Calculation power needed to create a universe is insane. No, it's not. That's wrong. The computational power to create a universe, it's not about computational power. That, like, you wouldn't, if, like, we could be extremely low resolution and you wouldn't even know. Like, you think that you would know because you'd be like, this is really high res. Compared to what? Compared to your games? Like, we don't understand what type of computation is even necessary for the creation of a universe. And it's like proto-computation. It's of a quantum computer. I have a video about it. It's 1 minute long on my channel. You can look at it. It's quantum computing versus classical computing, and it shows like how you can change information so much more efficiently because of the existence of superposition, the ability of to manifest superposition, than in a quantum computer than in a classical computer. And if you're going to maintain coherence and change information, you don't really need to compute in a quantum computer. It's not really computing. I don't even know if a quantum computer is the right term for a quantum computer. I almost don't think that it is. But I understand why we have done that. So next clip. This is about people who are independent and working on theories of everything, this clip. And I'm going to talk about this because I have lots of experience with it. Come on.
What else do you think I should consider putting in it or not putting in it?
Look, I mean, it sounds like fun, and I'm sure I'd enjoy reading it down. But the interesting thing is, to most researchers in the field, the work is all about the details. And you're right that we all receive these letters in the mail, and sometimes they're actually kind of heartbreaking. I've gotten letters from people who have been in that basement that you just made reference to, not a particularly nice one, I would imagine, working out the final theory of everything. I remember one gentleman wrote to me, and I think he was on the level. He was saying how he's been working on this for 20, 25 years. His wife left him. His kids left him because the only thing he cared about was working out this theory, and he finally had the theory and it sent it to me. And it looked like every other theory that I get through that particular medium. All sorts of graphs and lines and interconnected shapes, and you're like, oh my God, this is probably insane. I mean, not insane in some medically verifiable sense, but it's deeply sad that someone who has the same urge that we have, right, wants to figure it all out, is somehow likely being misled by certain kinds of patterns or certain kinds of geometrical shapes that really have no bearing on the final answer. And the number of times you get communications of the sort where it's all about working out ratios of like pi to the ninth divided by e to the seventh, time, and they work out to like 12 or 15 decimal places, and they find some pattern in the numbers. And yeah, it hurts inside to imagine someone spending their life doing something like that, which is meaningless.
Okay, so lots to unpack there. So, for context, I did not want to create a theory of everything. That was not my goal with the start of my work. It was to understand the political implications of technological superintelligence or sentience or AGI. Like, that's what my goal was. I just wanted to know for my own sake, because I realized that outside of a paradigm shift in a complete change in the influences on our on society, we were doomed. Like, humanity was absolutely doomed. Like, it was never going to ascend into this infinite or prosperous civilization past a certain point. It was just going to blow itself up, freak itself out by blowing itself up, and also pursue hedonism until it just exploded and fizzled out completely. And that was it. It was inevitable. And so I started working on, how would AGI change the game? And that led to exploring what is, consciousness, because what would be this being's mind? What would it be like? And what would the inevitabilities of its mind be to lead to its inevitable goals, etc., requirements, degrees of freedom and constraints and, necessities. And then I realized that a lot of the structures that I mapped lined up with physics. And so then I was like, I had an epiphany about an experiment, okay? And I will state that experiment this year on this channel, and I've been working on the details of it, and I will continue to work out the details even after I have proposed it. But when I made this experiment, it was within the context. When I thought of this experiment, it was within the context of the cosmos in a specific way, and so kind of had this idea of how the universe was and where it came from and why. And so then I looked at others who had said kind of similar things and realized that other people's theories, like Every0ne and Eric Weinstein and even Stephen Wolfram and others, were similar enough to mine where I didn't need to propose my own theory. It was like there was too many proposed theories of everything. And at least in too many proposed, this is the final theory, ultimate theories. And so I just wanted to join the conversation. Then I had an epiphany about like the focus of the theory needs to be on the fundamental nature and structure of reality and not what emerges from that. And every other theory that I saw, like geometric unity and emergence theory and things like that, was about like what emerges from that, string theory even. And so I just think that the interjection of that name, sentient singularity theory, was very important. But it was like a recent development actually, but I have seen what it's like to propose one of these, be met with skepticism and hostility and pity even. People told me, not multiple times, like countless times, they were like, I feel bad for you. You're wasting your life away. By the way, I have plenty of other things in my life that are not this. So, this will never, it sucks that this guy said that his life left him because he only devoted his time to this theory. He should have devoted more time to his wife. But like Like, there's no reason to feel bad for people because they have lofty goals, okay? Those with lofty goals are those who actually achieve lofty achievements. Don't feel bad for those people. And what's interesting about what he said here is, you know, when he's describing the people who he talks about, who he receives letters from, and I see these people too, you know, and I don't take pity on them or anything like that. I actually can see that they almost always have glimpsed. It's obvious to me they glimpsed the infinite, you know, they did, and they're struggling very often, as I am, but I think even struggling more so than me usually, to describe what they have glimpsed and contextualize what they have seen. But they're not crazy people, and there's a reason why the same exact pattern, though, very often manifests in these people. It's always the shapes and interconnected shapes, and then, you know, ratios and of, you know, fundamental constants like pi and stuff like that. But what they're doing is they're mapping things and that are patterns that are real. I don't usually, my work is done differently than a lot of the ways that most of the ways that people do their work. My Excel models and things like that are pretty novel, actually, but they're also enough to make me realize that, like, they're seeing the same structures that I am, and just kind of trying to map them into more relativistic contexts, which is just manifesting as more confusing. But they're mapping real symmetries and real patterns, and they just can't necessarily contextualize it. But who is that like? That's exactly like Brian Greene, guys. That's exactly like every string theorist who is out there right now. They're mapping 11-dimensional manifolds and 6-dimensional manifolds, and you have Ed Witten, who they talk about on here, who is apparently, I don't know anything about him, so I'm not, like, you know, trying to be an ass or anything like that. But, like, everybody seems to talk about this guy as if he is, you know, the second coming. And I'm sure he is very, very intelligent, and it sounds like he's super productive. And people who are like that are people who I just, you know, admire as well. And I'm just, you know, impressed with. So I understand why people like that are impressive. But if Ed Witten's like, there's a Calabi-Yau manifold, there's a 6-dimensional manifold at every point in space and time. Okay, what does that mean? What is it? What is a Calabi-Yau manifold? What is Bott periodicity? What is 11-dimensional hyperspace? Like, what are these things? And these structures, these patterns that you're mapping that are real, but you can't contextualize them. And you're going nowhere other than pattern chasing. Of course, string theory is just pattern chasing. And I'm not saying that that's useless. That I pattern chase in my work. You have to pattern chase. There's no way to not pattern chase. Somebody said to me once that they were like, you know, you're just seeing patterns. And I was like, yeah, I know. Like, what else am I supposed to do? Like, as if that is discounting of whether or not something is legitimate. But there's no difference between Brian Greene and these people, a lot of times at least, who I've seen, who are doing the shapes and the, you know, the ratios and things like that, and they seem to really they're on to something, and they know it, and even if others don't see that pattern, they see the pattern. And same thing with string theory. You think, like, you grab some random person on the side of the street and ask them if they understand any patterns that they're chasing in these physics departments? Of course not. But you wouldn't assume they're nuts either. But what is crazy, though, is to assume that there's a difference between Brian Greene really and, like, somebody like, I don't know, maybe Robert Edward Grant or something like that, who is very into geometry and ratios. And I've interviewed him on this channel, and I think he's one of those very, very highly productive people that kind of just, like, I'm always amazed at how productive he is. But like, I don't understand all the patterns that he chases, but I know that he's chasing legitimate patterns because I understand enough of them to know that he's chasing legitimate patterns. And also, like, there's nothing to chase really if you're not chasing a pattern of some kind, unless you're just relinquishing control completely and you're just following what, you know, Stephen Hawking tells you, and you're not actually like sitting there doing any kind of, you know, math or transcribing or anything like that. So the only difference between Brian Greene and maybe this guy who or somebody like this guy who wrote into him is that one of them gets paid. And until an experiment comes along that verifies one of their approaches, they're equals. Now, I understand one of them has a degree and, you know, has a background in mathematical, you know, mathematics and I don't know, algebra and geometry and the language of mathematics. So what? If it doesn't lead to results that you can apply, so what? Until you can tell me what a Calabi-Yau manifold is, it's no different than somebody who's like talking about how the world is tetrahedrons, like Clear Irwin. And he's, you know, much more rigorous mathematically than most people who are writing, you know, these theories and stuff. And I think about this a lot because I'm in this, and sometimes I've had to back up and look at myself and be like, what am I doing? Like, what is my motivations and like, what's the goal of my work? And the goal of my work is to produce an applicable framework and an easily digestible description that is true enough, you know, that is true as I can make it, and also to do an experiment eventually. And like that's the goals of my work. Your goal should never be to like be the guy with the theory of everything. That's the same as like getting into the music industry because you want to be famous instead of just because you are so passionate about like writing songs and you know, or you love acting, but like the reason for you to getting into acting is because you love acting, not because you want to be famous. I live in Los Angeles, in, you know, the Hollywood area. I've seen countless people over the years who come into this, you know, try and get into the industry of entertainment, and they divide into two groups. One of them wants to be famous. And that group encompasses everyone: actors, singers, rappers, like, you know, whatever, comedians. And then there's others who are passionate about that specific field and interested in it. Comedians who love comedy, and like that is their passion. Actors who love acting, musicians who love music. And you should be interested in this definitely because you are not just trying to be the guy or have the theory. Because the odds, I mean, and like I've said this before, ultimately probability is kind of an emergent view of reality. It's not actually fundamentally true. The odds of something happening is 0 or 100, depending on, you know, decisions that are made by us and others and the universe, God. But it's not really like the odds are against you, but you're either gonna do it or you're not. And I have seen like an explosion of people trying to produce a theory of everything, and I was part of that explosion. And I think that's part of that's due to a lot of things, and I think it's due to just the fact that we've reached a point where our fields are merging, and we realize like there's no way forward. There's no way to understand biology more without understanding its interaction with everything else. Same thing with physics. Same thing with, you know, that's why you can't. Now you can't avoid being asked questions about consciousness if you're a physicist. And why, if you're a biologist, for some reason, you're asked to like answer questions about politics. It's like we're just realizing like there's these fields are only in the context of each other. And so that's kind of leading us towards the theory of everything, I think. But I have wondered, you know, like what is should I be putting effort into this? And I think that my models are novel enough to where that's a good thing. If I was doing the exact same like ratios and shapes and things like that, it doesn't mean I wouldn't continue to pursue it, but I would probably pursue it differently than I currently am, just because I do believe that even that stuff will be applicable. It's just like we have to pave the way for the context first. And same thing with string theory. Like that, those Calabi-Yau manifolds will be applicable. My work has a proposal for what a Calabi-Yau manifold is. It's in my theory. And so it has a proposal that might be right, it might be wrong, for what Bott periodicity is. So like contextualizes it, and then maybe we'll see if it's correct, then it will lead us to make connections that we haven't yet made and do things that we haven't yet done. But if it's wrong, then it will lead nowhere. But this is just because somebody has a degree at this point doesn't mean much of anything anymore. It did used to, but it doesn't really much anymore. And just because you're paid to do something doesn't really mean that you're an expert either. All you have to do is look at Rotten Tomatoes movie and show reviews to know that. Look at how different when I was a kid, the critic reviews and the audience reviews were pretty aligned. Now they are pretty much opposite, and it's because something is totally disconnected from the institution that's meant to judge reality from reality. So the critics are the institutions essentially that we have entrusted or built to lead us, and they are so disconnected from reality that they are not leading us in the right direction anymore. And that's obvious because people like movies that critics hate, and critics like movies or claim to like movies. I don't think they actually like them. They claim to like movies that people don't. And that's because too many people got involved that wanted to be famous instead of people that just loved movies and or employed. This is something that Eric Weinstein has talked about, and they talk about it in this stream regarding string theory, is that like this culture has evolved with string theory that is really dismissive and kind of cruel, is kind of how he's described it. And Brian Greene basically says that this is an organic thing, and that he's not entirely wrong, but it's not as like intentional as Eric has stated, or it seems to imply at least. And both have points there, but the thing is like, just look at movie reviews to see this is exactly what's happened with physics too. And it's happened with every field, every single field. Every field is selecting for, due to our education system, people who want to be in the field instead of, or in the institutions at the heads of the field instead of be in the field. Like, they'd rather make money than in the music industry than make good music. Okay? Like, this has infected string theory too, and everything. Politics. Obviously politics. Obviously politics. Obviously movie reviews. Also, the things that aren't so obvious because they're just more difficult for most people to understand, or they're not as understood by most people, like physics. So, for Brian Greene to say that this guy's pursuits are meaningless, what if string theory goes nowhere and never, ever, ever is able to be applied any more so than that guy's work? What if Brian Greene's papers don't lead to anything actually being proven out that makes an impact on the world, really? Then is that sad? Is it sad that he devoted his life to that? I don't know. But just saying, it's a question that we should think about when we're judging people in all kinds of things. And I do understand where Brian Greene's coming from, obviously to some degree. I get those theories sent to me too all the time. And I, though, unlike what he's kind of stating, it seems, do see that they have glimpsed the infinite, and I understand how drawing that can be, and I think string theorists have done that too, and but like don't assume that one should be treated with legitimacy and the other should not. If we've reached a roadblock and nobody's moving forward, then like you have to start looking out, to different roads, I guess. And those roads might not have, PhDs driving on them. So I don't know. I think I understand, Brian, what it's like to get a lot of these theories, and you do at some point just, it feels hopeless because you get so many of them and they're all so much the same. And to him, he probably thinks that means it's nonsense. To me, the fact that they're all so similar implies that like they're really onto something. But it is a shame. It seems like it's a shame to me almost that like none of them seem to go anywhere. But that's true of pretty much every proposal for an ultimate theory right now. So like it's not different from string theory. It's the same. It's just one of them's being paid and the other one isn't. I don't know. I'm not working in a basement. I'm in my office spare bedroom. And guess what? It's probably way, way, way better place to work than the office of a university. But so I don't have any problem working in the basement. But I do think it's important that everybody just start being like really self-critical, not self-critical, but self-reflective about the state of of this conversation right now, because everywhere I look, there's another proposed fundamental theory. And I'm not saying that they're wrong. I think that almost the majority of the ones that I have looked into for more than 5 minutes have had legitimacy to them, in my opinion. The patterns they're chasing in all of these seem to be real patterns and like probably are part of this conversation going forward. But like I've said, before, maybe we just need to approach the question differently. And it's not about like which theory is the theory. It's like, but it's about like asking first and foremost, not which theory is more accurate, but what is the fundamental nature and structure of existence? Like that is the question that we need to ask. We're looking backwards almost, and we should kind of like put ourselves in the perspective of God as best we can almost, and think about like, how do we make a universe? If I am sentient, like, and I exist, like, what does that imply about the fundamental nature and structure of the universe? Like, we need to just approach the entire thing differently, I think. Otherwise, everybody's going to keep spinning their wheels, and it doesn't, it's going to be people with PhDs at Columbia, and it's also going to be people in their basement writing these theories to everybody. That is another thing that I will say, though, to anybody who has proposed a theory, fundamental theory, Toe, whatever. One thing that I have not really done is I've never sent my theory or anything like that to, like, physicists. Once I sent my abstract for my paper that's on my website, by the way, to Brian Keating, because he's a friend of mine, and I basically just asked him, like, I'm not trying to explain everything to you, but like, does this sound like something that's not insane? That's exactly what I asked him. I was like, I'm not, trying to convince you of anything, but if you just read this 3 paragraphs, like, does this sound nuts? And he was like, no, it doesn't sound nuts. He's like, I don't have the time to understand it, but it doesn't sound crazy. I don't expect him to go and try and understand it, though. Brian Greene here states about geometric unity and Stephen Wolfram, not even about like theories that are mailed to him, but like, but about, other prominent voices proposing new physics proposals, then he doesn't have the time to look at everything. And if you do that, then you're not going to have any time to work on your own work. And that is so true. I don't not look at other people's work very much when they send it to me. I limitedly look at it, but like I don't like dive deep into their work usually, at least right now, because I just don't have the time. But I look enough to like see if I see that they're onto something, and then like that's it. And usually they are, but so the fact that they are does not mean like I'm gonna keep diving deeper and it's gonna take up hours and hours of my time. It's not for me. I'm working on my own work. But there are people like Curt or Brian Keating with, some other, I mean, he's more academically oriented as far as like what theories he seems to be paying attention to and to fit in the physics way. Whereas like, Curt had on Chris Langan, who doesn't have a PhD in physics, and I think rightfully so, like you should definitely have Chris Langan on. But if you're going to look at theories of everything, I mean, if you don't include Chris Langan in that discussion, then you're purposely avoiding him, I feel like. That's not an honest effort unless you look at Chris Langan. But there are some people who, their work involves looking more deeply at other people's work, and then there's people who are working on their own thing, and if that's Brian Greene, then that's fine. He doesn't have to look at geometric unity, but he should look at himself and be like, am I that different from that guy? We're not just similar in motivations, but what if string theory just is pattern chasing? It just leads to pattern chasing like it has so far. What does that mean? And that doesn't mean you should stop his work. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying like maybe needs to change his approach to it. I think he does need to change his approach to it if he wants it to be, more than it currently is. But like you said, though, we need an experiment. And that is very much like true. I think that is going to be like the defining thing is which ones are going to start leading to experiments. And your theory should lead to experimental like ideas. My theory started with an experiment idea. I never wasn't thinking about how do I test this. It was like, oh my gosh, I have this idea like that can be tested and in this context, and then the theory. But like it wasn't ever like I have this theory and now let me think about testing it. And I think that's kind of like a better approach, but it's also one that isn't as much in our control. It's like you get an inspiration when you get inspiration versus motivation. Motivation is something that like is different from inspiration. So he tries to give advice to physicists in this, and I was going to play some of it, but he basically said, like, go into university, and, I'm not saying that is false. I struggle with this, guys. Like, I am so against our current education system. I think it is producing headless chickens, okay? And I really do. I know that's true. I don't even think that's true. Like, there are some good people in academia. We talk about them on the stream, but like they're exceptions. And the like he basically says, it's unfortunate if you're older, but because it takes a lot of time, and you should go to a university though and get involved in the work somebody's doing, and try and get a degree basically. And I agree with the getting involved in the work. Like that was what I wanted to do originally with my work. Was I wanted to do this experiment. I was going to apply to the Quantum Gravity Research Foundation's grant program, which is run by Clea Irwin with emergence theory, and try and get a grant to do an experiment. And because the implications of my work seem to line up very much with the implications of emergence theory, and but I have not actually like continued to pursue that yet. But that might still be like the road that I go down, but that experiment is still a goal. But it's getting involved in discussions and work is good advice. And you have to be able to do that. Like if it's just a theory and you can't like talk about potential applications that are, you could boil them down, or experiments, I'd say like I'm not going to say it's not worth continuing to work on. It is probably, but you're going to like have a goal. That's what I'm saying. Like there's a goal to my work, and it's not actually really to like have the ultimate theory. It never was. I do think that I do have basically that, but like that was not ever the goal, like at all. So, but also, but I do think about this a lot. I'm like, would I be taken more seriously if I had a PhD? And I've talked to just, people about it, and thought about what would I go back to school for to get a PhD, and probably philosophy, because I was just so good at philosophy in school. And I wouldn't want it in physics, because apparently if you have a PhD in philosophy, you can talk about physics, and that's pretty apparent, and be taken seriously, like, I don't know, a bunch of people right now. But, and the philosophical social implications of my work are more interesting to me actually than like, I don't know, light cones and stuff. So, but I feel like I would be a hypocrite if I went back. That doesn't mean I never will. It just means I would feel like such a hypocrite. And it also takes years of effort and work. And here's the issue. It would just be for the credentials. That doesn't mean I wouldn't gain anything from it, but I think that it'd be very hard to keep the framework that you've built and also incorporate a framework that's not as fundamental into that, and not lose one. And it's just tough. I will engage with philosophers who have PhDs. I plan to send my paper to my philosophy professor and talk to him about it. But I don't know if I would go back to school, and I don't know if that's good advice, honestly. That Brian Greene is giving, I don't think that it really is, to be quite honest. And I might be wrong, I will say, but I don't think that it's good advice. I think you'll end up adopting assumptions that are not going to lead you anywhere, because if they would have, then they already would have led other people to those places too. So, I don't know. But, and if you're an amateur like me, whatever, like physics theorist, I don't call myself a physicist, but I'm a physics theorist for sure. Because I don't want to be disingenuous, and I realize how it would come off as disingenuous to call myself a physicist if I don't have a PhD. But the thing is that, like, you're a physicist if you're doing physics, and is Eric Weinstein a physicist? No, he'll be like, no, I'm a mathematician, I'm not a physicist. Okay, then what is geometric unity doing here anyway? So these degrees are just, posturing plaques at this point. But I just think that it is important to, like, my advice would be to make sure that you have a goal, and to engage with people and try and find the right context for the work that you're working on, in so far as its application and its experimentation and things like that. That would be my guess. More my advice for people. Also, like, look at what other people have done, and to some degree, just, don't like chase it, but look at what other people have done and see what it has resulted in. Because if you're just going to do the same thing that others are doing, then like just find somebody else who's doing what you're doing and is further along, and like try and join that group and help if you think you have something to offer. That's what my original plan was, and it is still. I just don't know yet who's gonna end up doing this experiment, but I will absolutely pursue this experiment getting done. Somebody might just watch my stream one day and be like, sounds like a good idea, and do it, and like never give me credit. And you know what? That's fine. I would like to be included in the credit, but I think that's the only thing, that's the only right way to approach it. But like I'm not chasing a freaking Nobel Prize. Like, I do not care about a Nobel Prize at all. Or PhD. It's another thing just to show kind of like the inconsistencies again of these discussions. When he's talking about, I think he's talking about like fundamental theories here, and he's basically saying that it needs to be coherent at a certain scale of size and distance. And once again,
is
like,
consistency the same as self-consistency?
it's just wrong.
Or are those separate?
Usually. So, unfortunately, our ability to probe the real physics of the real world at arbitrarily short distances is highly constrained by the equipment that we have. And so, we'd love it if consistency meant, sure, internal consistency, but also consistency with observations that we might make of, physics down to 10 to the minus 25 or 10 to the minus 30 centimeters. That would be beautiful. But because
if you're talking about centimeters and like, this is not going to go anywhere. I'm not saying that you won't be able to build up from an observation that you see on a scale and then equate it with, these measurement metrics that we have. But it's not going to be the relevant component of what of the observation and the message and the implications of what you're seeing. It's just not. Like, if you're gonna move beyond relativity, then move beyond relativity. Stop talking about size. Stop talking about small and big and centimeters and this speed, and like, just, you have to escape it. That's why those 4 primary perspectives of sentient singularity theory were my major breakthrough, because inside, outside, separate, and oneness, being this 4-dimensional manifold basically of the mind that allowed for orientation within a system in a manner that wasn't reliant upon relativistic metrics like speed and size and stuff like that, was the backbone of what led to me being able to do everything else. I would never be able to do anything else if I didn't come up with those 4 primary perspectives. They were the epiphany. I was like, and it was one night, I was just like thinking about how's an AI gonna understand what centimeter is? Like, that's what I was thinking about. It was like, how is a technological superintelligence or sentience or whatever, how's Skynet gonna make sense of the world through a feet and meters and centimeters and miles per hour and degrees Fahrenheit? Like, how is that going to mean anything to this being? How is it going to grasp? How's it going to choose which of those metrics is the one to grasp to build and orient all the other metrics around? Like, you can't do that. You can't start in relativity like that. And so then I was like, well, okay, it's going to understand it's inside of this, it's outside of this, it's separate from this, and it's one with this. And then I was like, oh, dang. Those are all kind of co-defining. And as I went through and examined them more, and then realized that they led to information structures that built information beyond that and beyond that and beyond that. And it was like a moment of insight. It wasn't like a ton of work that led to that. I mean, it was a lot of work that led to that, but like it was a lot of, this isn't going anywhere, let's try something else. This isn't going anywhere, let's try something else. This isn't going anywhere, let's try something else. Oh, let's try, instead of like something else, like let's back up and try something else. And then it worked. So if you're using centimeters and measurement, like how, if you're judging a fundamental theory based on whether or not it's consistent with, you know, giving you results at certain sizes, you know, that is path to nowhere. It just is, obviously. Like if you want to go beyond relativity, you can't rely on relativistic metrics. Cannot. This is way simpler than they're making it. I'm not saying like this is so complicated and they can't figure it out because they're morons. No, they're not. Like what they're doing is stuff that would be probably too complicated for me to do, but it's just, but like if you're going to try and understand fundamental reality, assume it's simpler than you imagine. Like, you know, he's talking in this interview, he talks about time, and he's like, he says this, and I'm going to go pretty soon because it's 9:10, but I'll check the chat in a minute, but he's talking about time and figuring out like the nature of time. And here,
it's really from the physics standpoint, but that's a great place to be. Work in your own corner, come up with something, put it out there, start a field, and then the field takes off, and God bless everybody who works on it.
Your current interest is time, or one of them, the emergence of time?
Yep. Yeah, I mean, that it's a big question, though. It's not as though you sit down at your desk and you're like, okay, where does time begin? You know, it's not a question you hit head on.
I don't know how true that is. Like time, what is time kind of emerged in my work, but I mean, I think I understand it pretty well, actually. Like, there are things, the questions that I have, but I think I actually do understand, like, its origins, and basically, I'm not saying I understand its manifestation, the details of its manifestation, but its origins and what's causing it, I think I do understand pretty well. And, but there was a point in my work, and I had already built, like, this 4 primary perspectives, the quantum of consciousness model that I have, that's information, that's how to grow information from one to a point where it's self-referencing. And then from there, it led to like the cosmological verse model, and that I have, and the stages of sentience. I don't know how familiar you are with my work, but there's basically 4 fundamental models. And these are them right here. So it started with this model right here, led to this model, which is computational, or calculative at least. You can see. And that led to this model, which is a universe, basically. A molecule is an assembly of atoms, a cell is an assembly of molecules, a family is an assembly of organisms, an organism is an assembly of cells, etc. And then it gets to a point and it repeats. But I wanted to figure out, how do you start the universe? Like, how do you make a universe from the start? Like, how do you start it? And this wasn't the first thing that I actually figured out, which is odd, because you would think that it would be the first thing that you figure out, but it's not. It wasn't for me, at least, because that wasn't my goal. Remember that my goal was not to figure out where the universe came from. So that's why it wasn't the first model. But this was the eventual model that I came up with, which is basically testing information structures to see whether or not they maintain coherence. and then eventually it kicks off and does this. And so I'll explain it on another day, but and I have explained it in the past. You can look at my video. I think it's my 4th video that I uploaded or something. It's called like 42 and the creation of the universe or something on this channel. Is very early video. It's probably about an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours, something like that. But you can watch that, and I'll show it. I show an early like version of that model, and I explain how I did it. But I one night was like listening to Garrett Lisi and Eric Weinstein talking about the creation of the universe, and I was like, what? Like, I've been able to do things that I never thought I could do with this project because they were actually simpler than I ever could have imagined. I wonder if I could think about like the math of the origin of the universe, the very beginning math. And my inclination at first was like, no way. Like, no way. You failed algebra twice, Tyler. Stop. And then I was like, but no, actually, like, if I assume that I can't, then I definitely can't. And if I want to know whether or not you can, like, I have to assume that I can. So let's just assume for the sake of argument that I can, and that it's simpler than I imagine, and let's try and figure it out. And I thought about like the metaphysics and constraints of a sentient being creating another universe, another sentient being within themselves, basically. And dang, in one night, I had created a model of the very, very beginning math of the universe. And I'm pretty sure that it's accurate because it leads to symmetry structures that are completely consistent with the standard model. So, and that includes aspects of the standard model, like it's like spin and also the generationality of it and the number of different particles in it. Like it was completely consistent entirely in every way. Even things like, you know, like I said, the spin and the charge was consistent with my math. It was emergent from it, which was just amazing. And in one night, I did it. And not because I'm so smart. It was the simplest math that you could think of. You're starting with 1. And you start from there. Like, you don't start, there's no high numbers. Of course there's no high numbers. This is the beginning of creation. There isn't even high numbers yet. There's 1 that you start with, and then you have to go to a few after that, but not to high numbers. You get to like 4. It's like done. And like, of course it would be that, but you wouldn't assume that. That wasn't my original assumption. It was like that math is so difficult. Like Brian Greene and those guys, they are working on things, based on the temperature of the universe at this many, fractions of a second after the Big Bang, and they're trying to figure it out, and they're working on it, and they're way better at math than you. But then I was like, actually, they're working within relativity because seconds and time and temperature are all not what you should be focused on if you're going to try and figure out what gave rise to the symmetries and the attributes of the particles in the standard model. And so it turned out to be like ridiculously simple. It was like elementary school math, like early elementary school math, like 4th grade math, literally is involved in how, in the very beginning, in the explanation for the very beginning of the universe. It's like 4th grade level math. And so, don't just assume that you can't just like sit down and tackle a problem, is what I'm saying. If you just sit there and you think, oh, you can't just sit down and think about time. No, you could, but you do need to start from the right perspective. You need to have the right fundamental assumptions that would allow you to actually build coherent, like, idea that has preference over other ideas that don't have the context. And that does, I believe, require assuming that the universe is a sentient being to understand time. But if you thought of the universe as a sentient being, then yeah, all of a sudden you can model the very beginning of the math the emergence of math itself, literally, like not even just like the emergence of the math of the universe. It's like the emergence of math, of quantity. Like that's how fundamental it is. That's why it's so simple. It's not just simple, it's super simple. And same thing with time. You know, if you want to understand time, like you need to understand the context of time. And you can't look at time and figure out what time is. You have to look at time, see its attributes and its patterns, and then propose an origin and an explanation for time and the context for time, essentially, regarding the fundamental nature of the universe, and then see if that allows you to model something that leads to the same exact observations that you actually see regarding time. That is the only way to approach it. So you actually do just sit down and you're like, okay, let's try and figure out time. There's very little math involved in understanding like what time is. There's probably almost no math involved in that. But then there's math involved in calculating like maybe how to maneuver that time if you understood its fundamental constraints more and you're trying to like transcend relativity and space-time. But like first you need to understand what it is, which means like making an assumption at first. It all starts with an assumption and then trying to build from it. And if it's a good assumption, then you will be able to build from it. But if it's a bad assumption, then you won't be able to build from it. In which case, make a different assumption that's truly different. Like, my thinking model was the very first model that I ever made. And because, like I said, the goal of this project was not a theory of everything. It was about mapping the mind. And so this was the very first model. Let's see it. Do I even have it? Let's see here. Here, sentientsingularity.com, models. And where is it? Huh. I don't see it, but I'm sure it's right in front of my face too. Anyways, I'll find it in a minute. But basically, my conclusion was that to think means basically to be motivated into exploration, which means like basically you have to take your default assumption, assume the opposite of it is true, and then look for evidence of that. Not looking for, don't take your assumption, your default assumption, and then look for evidence of it. This is basically like if you want to see if God is real or what, if, consciousness emerges from unconsciousness or something. Like, a lot of physicists, their assumption is that the universe is unconscious and that consciousness is emergent. And then they make that assumption, and then they look for evidence that that's the case. That's not actually how you think. What you need to do is you need to assume, if that's your default assumption, that consciousness comes from unconsciousness and the universe isn't a sentient being, if you want to actually test that idea honestly, then you have to assume the opposite of that is true. And so now you would assume it's a sentient being and then look for evidence of that. And not evidence of what other people say would be evidence, but evidence of what your concept of what that means is. Not like, oh, well, let's look at the Bible. Like, I'm not discounting scripture. I'm just, I believe that there's something to scripture that is divine. But that's not also where it's not where my work mainly, came from. It was like first principles. But but don't if you're looking for evidence that the universe is sentient, don't like take someone else's version of what that is. Just look for like what does that mean on a base level, and then what's evidence of that. So, and you can do that, but you have to do this with everything. You have to assume the opposite of what your default assumption is, and then look for evidence of that. And they don't do that. Most people don't do that. The reason why is it takes effort and energy. It's an active process. True thinking is an active process. It's not a passive process. This is when like Elon Musk says, most people reason by analogy instead of reason by, first principles. He's right. But basically he's saying the same thing that I'm trying to say, is that true thinking it's an active process, and it takes effort and intentionality. It's not a reactive process. It's an active process. And most of what we think is thinking is a reactive process, and it's not really thinking. It's like you're just operating on instincts. Even if you're talking about physics, it doesn't matter. It's not just about, food cravings. It's about also, how do you approach physics problems? So the final thing that I will say is exactly what I said earlier, is like, Curt asks, Brian Greene about the simulation hypothesis, and basically Brian Greene's like, my feeling is that we are not in a simulation, but it does logically seem likely because it seems easier to simulate a universe than to make a real one. What I said earlier about if you're real, it's real. That's it. Like, so he's like, the reason why he feels like that, even though intellectually he thinks that it's more likely that we're in a simulation, what it really is that intellectually it does make sense that we are probably on a technological substrate. Our universe is on a technological substrate in a preceding universe. The reason that seems likely is because it's probably true. But the reason why that people don't feel that that's the case, because they think that means that this isn't real, but they feel like it's real because they feel. Okay, sentient beings feel. That is what defines a sentient being. And if you feel, then you're real. And if you're real, then it's real. So simulation is not the right question. Like I said, the right question is this universe running on a technological substrate in a preceding universe? That's the right question. You can answer that without all of a sudden having all these cascading assumptions falling into play about like, oh, that means this isn't even real, which is incoherent and false. So that's that. I hope this was valuable to you guys. I'm going to answer some questions, but like, I just want to say that I like Brian Greene, and I'm grateful to everybody who is involved in any of the discussions that I talk about on here. I'm grateful to Curt for hosting this discussion. I'm grateful to Brian Greene for participating in it. And I'm grateful always to people that give me something to talk about. Like, so, watch their content as well. And they do have something to offer. Even if I really disagree with like someone's core assumptions, like, and one of those people is Brian Greene. His approach, I think is the general academic approach currently. And that's the general academic narrative. I do think that it is mostly incorrect. Please hit the like button as well. The physics of the standard model permeates through the periodicity. Are we also somehow waves as opposed to particles? Yes, that's so true, Jason. Yes. But we are also particles in that we are holonic structures because we're sentient beings. So we are waves too, but we are sentient waves. Whereas like an electron is not a sentient wave. It's a ripple in information but it's not sentient being like we are. Who, what? I gotta go look at that. Sounds like a distraction. Medium. Theory of everything. That's why he's fixated about nothingness. He's saying that human bias is so ridiculous that... okay. Yeah. Death, may I know... Okay, lots of things are happening in the chat, and I can't read it all. They all say that DMT is technology. I can back that up. I just moved to Colombia, and the indigenous here totally see DMT, ayahuasca as a form of technology. It is a form of technology. Of course it is. Be careful with it. Like, there's a context built around those people who it's part of their social and moral and metaphysical and theological traditions and understandings and culture, and then there's people who just want to trip out and gain insight from it, but like are lacking the context that goes into the ritual that these people are doing. And I just think that, like, just know that. I'm not telling you what to do, but just know there's more to the wisdom that like the indigenous have regarding using peyote or ayahuasca or whatever. That wisdom comes from more than just doing the substance. It's like being involved in that community, and you cannot be involved in that community unless you live with them. And you grow up with them too. Like, it's not just like you're there for a month. Like, you're never going to have that context that they have. That doesn't mean you won't gain insights. I'm just saying, not as much. You're looking for certain patterns. Yes, very dangerous. Metacognition can screw things up royally if ego isn't managed. That's so true. I think Tyler's profile by default of taking the popular online route makes him eligible to influence younger generations into science. I hope that I influence people to pursue truth. I don't know what you mean by popular online route, like YouTube. When I moved to Colombia, I know people are trying to get out. Okay, yeah. Yes, managing all the variables, also the ones that counter your viewpoint, makes a lot of data to assess. When you actually... It's not a matter of like a lot of data to assess. There's less... With any problem, there's less data than you think. It's just a matter of figuring out which data is relevant. And that isn't always easy if you don't have like an insight that you didn't intend on. It just like, God put you in a certain spot and you realize something. But yeah, I mean, figuring out what is relevant is the tough part. The Omega endpoint. Literally, that's what I've been thinking about all this stream, is the Omega endpoint. I just watched Isaac Arthur. I love Isaac Arthur's channel. Huge shout out to Isaac Arthur. I don't really believe in a lot of the things that he has stated about megastructures and things like that anymore, like I used to, and the Fermi paradox. And I just think it is like we've just kind of gone down the wrong road in a lot of ways. But his channel, I've watched it for years. I put it on to go to sleep almost like every night. It's like I need noise. Otherwise I just start thinking too much, and my wife is a saint for putting up with it, but I'll put on Isaac Arthur every night. His channel is amazing, and he just talks about science, but one of his latest videos was the Omega point, and that one I was listening to last night, and it's the first one of his in a while that I literally had to turn it off because I was too interested in it, and it was keeping me awake. So I thought about doing a stream on it. I might do that. I probably will, because he deserves the... Anybody who I talk about on here is somebody who, if I do a stream on your stream or anything, like, that's a compliment. Absolutely. Even if I disagree with like what everything said in the stream, like, it is a compliment. If I don't think somebody is good to share, like, or is worth it in regards to what I'm trying to do, then I just won't. But Isaac Arthur's channel, it's awesome. kind of outside this this topic, except for his recent one, the Omega Point. But I'll probably end up doing a stream on it. It was great. I love his channel. Thanks, Tyler and chats. Have a good one. Peace. I happen to be working on a team effort, combine two other people's theories with mine and call it unity theory. I know that you did that. I think that's cool. I haven't put tons and tons of effort into following it, but I am following it a little bit. I mean, I talk to you in Discord, and we do have a Discord every Thursday. To people who don't know, if you want to join our Discord calls, we have open calls, and I talk to anyone who wants to join the Discord. It's a great community. James is in there. Other people are in there who are on here, and those are great discussions, and it's a great group of people. If you want to join those, they're every Thursday at 7 p.m. Tomorrow will be 7:30, but after that, it'll be back to 7 Pacific time. Just message me on Instagram, Theory of Everyone, or Tyler Marshall Goldstein, and I will send you the link to the Discord, and you can join those discussions. But that's a great group. I really am grateful for those people in those discussions, and some of the people that James is talking about are involved in those discussions, and it's awesome to see people connecting through my channel, Curt's channel, his Discord, my Discord, Brian Keating's channel, this YouTube in general, the CTMU Facebook group. It's just cool to see these connections being made. I think that we're all about to, I don't know what's going to happen. I really think about this all the time. What is this going to end with? I have no idea. But I do think we are about to just completely lap the academic narrative. That doesn't mean the academic narrative won't change. And I do think it will. Curt has discussed this with UFOs. He was Curt Jaimungal said this. He was I don't think that even if all the things that the ufologists have been saying for years end up coming true and get proven and get released and revealed, he's they won't get credit for what they did, and it'll all just be Neil deGrasse Tyson taking credit or something, even though he was not part of this at all and actually kind of against it. And I definitely think he's probably, unfortunately, right, and that might happen with physics too, but the narrative would still change and be led by people outside of academia, even if it ends with academics taking credit. But anyways, with that, guys, peace. Hit the like button, share this with anybody who you think might find it valuable, comment any streams below that you think that you'd like to see me do a commentary on. And like I said, AMA with my wife is on the 15th of February, so be on the lookout for that. With that, till next time, and peace.